The fluorescent hum of the research station was Marcus's preferred soundtrack. It was a sterile, predictable thrum, a constant against which the chaotic tapestry of history could be meticulously unraveled. His fingers, stained faintly with ink from archived documents, traced a forgotten date on a brittle parchment. Here, amidst the climate-controlled silence and the scent of aged paper and ozone, he found his solace. The past, for Marcus, was a quantifiable entity, a series of verifiable facts, dates, and names, devoid of the irrational. Legends were merely the embellishments of ignorance, superstition a crutch for minds unwilling to confront the stark, unvarnished truth. His current project, a comprehensive timeline of regional land ownership disputes from the late 17th century, demanded absolute focus. He had dismissed the insistent buzzing of his comm unit for the better part of an hour, a minor irritation against the weight of centuries-old legal jargon. When it finally ceased, a brief, blessed quiet descended. It was swiftly broken by a sharp rap on his frosted glass door. Marcus sighed, a sound barely audible above the low drone of the air filtration system. He did not look up from the document. "Enter," he stated, his voice flat, accustomed to minimal interaction. A junior colleague, a young woman whose perpetually anxious expression Marcus found vaguely distracting, edged into the room. He held a thick, cream-colored envelope, its formality stark against his casual attire. Marcus, a courier, delivered this, marked urgent and personal. Her voice was hushed, as if fearing to disturb the delicate ecosystem of the archives. He took the envelope without a word, his gaze still on the parchment. The colleague retreated, the door clicking shut with a soft finality. Marcus examined the seal. A black wax impression of a stylized raven, unfamiliar. The address was typed, precise. His own name, followed by the research station's address. No sender listed. A minor anomaly, nothing more. He slit the envelope with a letter opener, a precise, clean incision. Inside, a single sheet of heavy vellum, densely typed. The opening paragraph was direct, unambiguous. "It is with formal regret that we inform you of the passing of your distant relative, Alistair Blackwood. As his sole surviving heir, you have inherited his estate, specifically Blackwood Manor and its surrounding lands." Marcus reread the lines. Alistair Blackwood. The name was a phantom, an echo from an ancient, barely remembered family tree his grandmother had once meticulously and tediously recited. Blackwood Manor. The name pricked at something in the periphery of his memory. A whisper of local folklore. Something about shadows and ill fortune. Superstition. Nothing more. He scoffed quietly. The solicitor's letter continued, detailing the logistical requirements, the need for his presence to formalize the transfer of deeds. It concluded with a polite, almost apologetic note regarding the manor's unique history and the local community's particular regard for its traditions. Marcus interpreted this as a euphemism for rural eccentricity and unfounded rumors. His interest was piqued, not by the inheritance itself, but by the potential for historical documentation. An ancient manor, regardless of its reputation, would possess records, ledgers, perhaps even a forgotten library. A new avenue for research. He made the necessary arrangements with a detached efficiency. The journey was long, a deliberate excision from the world he knew. The landscape outside the window grew steadily wilder, the towns sparser, the trees denser. The air, once crisp and sterile, now carried the heavy, damp scent of pine and decaying leaves. The sky hung low, a bruised gray. The driver spoke little, only confirming the destination with a curt nod when Marcus stated it. As they turned onto a narrow, unpaved track, the vehicle's tires crunched over loose gravel. Trees, ancient and gnarled, formed a tunnel overhead, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers. Sunlight, already scarce, struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting the path into a perpetual twilight. Then, through a break in the trees, it appeared. Its architecture was a jumble of styles, suggesting centuries of additions and alterations, each layer adding to its monolithic presence. Windows, countless and irregular, stared out like vacant eyes, reflecting nothing but the muted sky. The roofline sagged in places, a spine bowed by time. A pervasive dampness seemed to emanate from its very walls, even from this distance. The driver pulled to a stop at a wrought iron gate, rusted and half obscured by ivy. He pointed with a thumb towards the manor. Been empty for a long time. People around here, they keep their distance. His gaze lingered on the house, then darted to Marcus, a flicker of something unnameable in his eyes before he quickly looked away. Marcus nodded, his expression neutral. Superstition, he reiterated mentally. He paid the driver, who accepted the money with a speed that suggested eagerness to depart. The vehicle turned with a groan, its tires spraying gravel, and disappeared back down the tree-lined track, leaving Marcus utterly alone. The air was thick, still, and carried a faint, cloying scent of mildew and something else. Something subtly metallic, like old blood, or perhaps just rust. The crunch of his boots on the leaf-strewn drive was unnaturally loud. As he approached the manor, its scale became overwhelming. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the walls, pulling at the mortar, its tendrils probing the gaps in the window frames. He ran a hand over the rough, cold stone of the porch. It felt less like a structure and more like a geological formation, something that had always been there and would always remain. The front door, an immense slab of oak studded with iron, bore the same raven crest he had seen on the solicitor's letter. It was unlocked. He pushed it inward. The hinges groaned, a long, drawn-out cry that echoed through the cavernous space beyond. A gust of stagnant, frigid air met him, carrying with it the undeniable scent of decay, dust, and something else. Something indefinable yet profoundly unsettling. Marcus stepped across the threshold. The door swung shut behind him with a soft thud, a sound that resonated with an unnerving finality. But beneath that, an unfamiliar tightness began to coil in his gut. The faded parchment felt brittle between Marcus's fingers. Blackwood Manor. The name resonated with a faint, unsettling hum, a forgotten chord struck in the vast symphony of his family's lineage. Now it was a physical address, a looming inheritance, a new subject demanding his methodical dissection. He folded the solicitor's letter with a crisp snap, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the drawing room. The journey had been long, the approach to the manor a winding ribbon of gravel through a dense, ancient wood that seemed to swallow the afternoon light. Now, within its walls, a pervasive scent of damp earth and aged paper clung to the air, a scent that Marcus, ever the historian, found both repellent and strangely invigorating. He had spent the first 2 days simply observing, walking the creaking floorboards, cataloging the decay, noting the vast, empty spaces. The house was a monument to neglect, yet it possessed a stubborn, weighty presence, a silent testament to centuries of forgotten lives. His priority was establishing his research station. He selected a large, relatively intact room on the ground floor, its windows overlooking a tangled, overgrown garden. Boxes upon boxes of his meticulously organized research materials, historical texts, archival printouts, microfiche readers, and his beloved heavy-duty scanner were hauled in. He cleared a grand, dust-shrouded mahogany desk, wiping away layers of grime with a damp cloth, the dark wood emerging with a dull, bruised sheen. He arranged his tools with the precision of a surgeon. Stacks of blank archival paper, specialized pens, his laptop, and a portable lamp. This room, once perhaps a study or a library, would now be his command center, his intellectual bulwark against the silent encroachments of the old house. As he unpacked a box of medieval land deeds, a sudden, sharp draft snaked around his ankles. Marcus paused, his fingers stilling on a bundle of vellum. He glanced towards the window, but it was firmly latched, the heavy velvet drapes drawn back to admit the wan light. He frowned, attributing it to an unseen crack in the wall, a trick of the old house's erratic ventilation. He shrugged, resuming his work. Old houses had quirks. It was a simple fact of their construction. Hours bled into the late afternoon. Marcus was engrossed in cross-referencing a local census record with a list of landowners from the late 17th century. He had set his magnifying glass down beside his laptop, a heavy brass instrument glinting under the lamplight. When he reached for it again, it was gone. His gaze swept the desk, then the floor around his chair. He had been meticulous, almost ritualistic in his placement of tools. He knew with absolute certainty where he had left it. A prickle of irritation, then a flash of self-recrimination. He was tired. The move had been exhausting. He must have nudged it, sent it rolling beneath a stack of papers. He rummaged through the piled documents, his frustration mounting. Finally, he spotted it, not beneath a stack, but tucked neatly under the edge of his open laptop, a place he would never have put it. He stared at it for a moment, a faint tremor of unease stirring beneath his logical certainty. Forgetfulness, he concluded. A simple lapse. Nothing more. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. Marcus worked on, fueled by strong coffee and an academic's stubborn focus. The manor groaned around him, a symphony of settling timbers and wind whistling through unseen gaps. He heard a distinct, almost rhythmic creak from the floor above, a sound that suggested heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. He stopped, listening. The house was empty. He was alone. The creaking continued for a few moments, then ceased abruptly. He knew the building was ancient, its structure protesting the passage of time. These were merely the sounds of an old house, a familiar refrain to anyone who lived in such a place. Yet, a peculiar tension began to coil in his gut, a subtle tightening he couldn't quite explain. His fingers brushed against something else, tucked deep behind the heavy tome. Not a book, but a small wooden box, its surface smooth with age, unadorned. He pulled it out, feeling its unexpected weight. Inside, nestled on a bed of decaying velvet, were several slim, leather-bound journals and a scattering of brittle, folded letters. Their paper was yellowed, the ink faded to sepia, but the script was elegant, precise. He picked up the topmost journal. The first entry was dated 1788. Not the son's work, but the house's own hunger. It remembers. It knows. Marcus frowned, his historian's curiosity piqued, but his skepticism firmly in place. Poetic hyperbole, he thought. The ramblings of an overwrought mind. He flipped to another page. My memory falters, faces blur. The solicitor's visit today? What did he say of the deed? He read on, skimming. The entries grew more erratic, the penmanship increasingly desperate. It feeds. On what, I cannot say. But I feel its tendrils within me, plucking at the threads of who I am. Alistair. Where did he go? Alistair. The name snagged in Marcus's mind. Alistair Blackwood. The same name from the solicitor's letter. The same name his grandmother had once mentioned, a phantom echo from a distant branch of the family tree. He looked up from the journal, his gaze sweeping the now dimly lit room of his newly established research station. He dismissed the thought instantly, but the question lingered, a faint, unwelcome echo in the quiet room. Alistair Blackwood. The name resonated with a dull thrum in Marcus's mind, a discordant note in the quiet of the manor. He sat, journal closed, the dim light from the single working lamp casting long, wavering shadows across the study. The solicitor's letter? His grandmother's fleeting mention. A forgotten branch of the family tree now seemed to be taking root in his immediate surroundings. The air in the room, once merely still, now felt heavy, as if saturated with unspoken histories. He dismissed the feeling as an overactive imagination, a natural consequence of delving into old documents in a decaying house. Yet, as the night deepened, a new layer of sound began to assert itself. It was not the familiar groan of old timber settling or the whine of wind through ill-fitting frames. These were subtle, internal sounds. Then, a low, indistinct murmur, a sound so ephemeral Marcus questioned if he had truly heard it or merely imagined the echo of his own thoughts. He paused his reading, head cocked, straining. Silence. He attributed it to the house's age, the unique acoustics of decaying plaster and ancient stone. The following days brought a slow, insidious escalation. A flicker in the shadow of the grand staircase, gone the instant his gaze sharpened. He rubbed his eyes, convinced it was fatigue, the strain of deciphering faded script. The isolation was beginning to fray his concentration, he reasoned. Sleep offered no respite. His nights became a fragmented landscape of vivid, unsettling dreams. He found himself trapped in labyrinthine corridors that shifted and narrowed, the walls pressing in, alive with an unseen presence. He heard faint, desperate cries that were never quite clear, always just beyond the cusp of intelligibility. The sense of being watched, of being prey, clung to him even after he was fully awake. A residue from the dream world that seeped into his waking hours. The journal's mention of Alistair Blackwood and the subsequent disquiet pushed Marcus towards a more rigorous investigation. He needed context, verifiable facts beyond the manor's dusty confines. The local history archives were sparse, hinting at a reputation for reclusiveness and misfortune among the manor's previous occupants, but offering little detail. He required more. He drove to the regional research station, a brutalist concrete structure housing an extensive collection of historical records. The archivist, a stoic woman with wire-rimmed spectacles, produced several heavy boxes. Marcus spent hours hunched over microfiche readers and brittle ledgers. The initial entries were innocuous: births, deaths, land deeds. But as he delved deeper into the 18th and 19th centuries, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. He found accounts, often euphemistically worded, of numerous residents exhibiting what was termed melancholia, or nervous afflictions. One entry detailed the descent of a certain Eleanor Blackwood into severe paroxysms of delusion, after several years of solitary residence, culminating in her disappearance in 1827. Another record from 1889 described the profound withdrawal of a Philip Blackwood, who was found in a state of profound catatonia after claiming the walls spoke to him. The pattern intensified. There were multiple instances of residents becoming increasingly reclusive, their wills updated to reflect growing paranoia, their final days marked by strange pronouncements or a complete inability to communicate. Often after the inheritor had embarked on an ambitious project to restore or significantly alter the structure, mirroring his own current endeavor. The sheer volume of such occurrences, stretching back centuries, was too significant to be mere coincidence. Madness, disappearance, suicide, all linked to isolation within those specific walls. His initial skepticism, a shield he had worn proudly, began to crack under the weight of the documented misfortunes. He tried to rationalize it, perhaps a familial genetic predisposition to mental illness, exacerbated by the isolation. But the details, the recurring themes of voices and a consuming presence, chipped away at his logical defenses. The research station's sterile air suddenly felt thin, insufficient to fill his lungs. Leaving the research station, the bright afternoon sun felt almost aggressive. The drive back to the manor was silent, save for the hum of the engine. The historical data gnawed at him, a festering wound in his previously unshakable rationalism. As the manor's gray facade loomed into view, it no longer appeared as a grand, if neglected, historical artifact. The sheer volume of these recurring patterns, documented across centuries, had begun to gnaw at Marcus's determined skepticism. He had initially dismissed the manor's reputation as folklore, the inevitable byproduct of isolation and antiquity. Now, hunched over faded ledgers in the library, the flickering gaslight casting long, dancing shadows, he felt a colder, more insidious logic at play. The consistency was too precise, the outcomes too similar to be mere coincidence. He pushed the books aside, the dry parchment rustling like desiccated leaves. He attributed it to the manor's age, a natural consequence of stirring centuries of settled air, yet it prickled at the back of his throat. That evening, the first true breach occurred. Marcus was meticulously cataloging the library's contents, his mind focused on the task. The rhythmic thud of each book placed back on its shelf, a grounding counterpoint to the manor's oppressive silence. It wasn't a sound from outside the room. It was in the room, raw and immediate, vibrating through the very floorboards. He froze, his hand still extended. The shriek was followed by the distinct sound of shattering glass, then a choked sob, abruptly cut short. The air in the library grew heavy, thick with an invisible dust that seemed to coat his tongue. He smelled the faint perfume again, stronger this time, mixed with something metallic and sharp blood. He blinked, his eyes darting around the room. The gaslight still flickered. The books were still on their shelves. No shattered glass lay on the floor, no evidence of any intrusion. The sounds had been utterly vivid, utterly real, yet entirely absent from his current reality. His heart hammered, a frantic drum against his ribs. He gripped the book, his knuckles white. This was an experience full and terrifying. Fatigue, perhaps, the strain of the research, the isolation. He was a historian, a man of facts, of empirical evidence. But the memory of the shriek, the smell of iron, lingered with a visceral clarity that defied dismissal. Over the next few days, the intrusions escalated. He'd turn, and there would be nothing but the aged wallpaper, the dust motes dancing in the faint light from a distant window. He began to feel an intense, unseen presence, as if the very walls watched him, their ancient gaze dissecting his every move. One afternoon, while inspecting a particularly ornate fireplace in the drawing room, the air thickened around him again. The scent of old perfume and damp earth returned, stronger than ever. The room around him began to waver, its familiar edges blurring. The rich tapestries on the walls seemed to shift, their woven scenes momentarily replaced by distorted, frantic faces. Then, the event. He saw a man, gaunt and wild-eyed, his clothes disheveled, standing before the very fireplace Marcus was examining. The man's face was contorted in a silent scream. His hands were clasped over his ears, as if trying to block out an unbearable sound. Behind him, the room was a whirlwind of motion furniture overturned, paintings askew. A woman, her face swollen with tears, was being dragged by a burly figure towards a hidden door in the wall. Hymn pleas, though soundless to Marcus, were etched onto his anguished expression. The air vibrated with despair, a palpable weight that pressed down on Marcus, suffocating him. He was not merely observing, he was experiencing it. A raw, unfiltered conduit for their suffering. The vision lasted only moments. The man, the woman, the overturned furniture. They dissolved like smoke, leaving Marcus alone in the silent, undisturbed drawing room. His hands were trembling. He leaned against the cold stone of the fireplace, gasping for breath, his mind reeling. This was not fatigue. This was not imagination. This was not folklore. His carefully constructed skepticism, his historian's reliance on documented fact, fractured like brittle glass. He had always believed in the objective truth, in the rational explanation. Now the manor was presenting him with a truth that defied all his training, all his understanding. It wasn't just a memory playing back. It felt as if the house itself was reaching into him, siphoning his own emotional responses, feeding on his fear. He remembered a conversation with a colleague years ago about the necessity of a controlled environment for any empirical study of unexplained phenomena, perhaps even a dedicated research station. The thought felt ludicrous now. How could one study this? How could one measure the tendrils of despair, the insidious absorption of sanity? He was not an observer. He was becoming a participant, a living canvas upon which the manor painted its ancient, traumatic memories. The unseen presence was no longer just watching, it was actively consuming, slowly blurring the lines between his reality and the manor's endless, agonizing past. The image of the screaming man, his face a mask of silent agony, remained etched behind Marcus's eyelids long after the fireplace returned to its solid, unremarkable state. He blinked, rubbing his temples, a dull ache throbbing there. It was a trick of the light, he told himself, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the oppressive silence of the manor. The vastness of the house, the sheer weight of its history, was finally getting to him. He needed fresh air, a connection to the outside world. He made his way to the small study he designated as his temporary office, a room with a single ancient landline telephone. He lifted the receiver. Nothing. No dial tone, only a flat, dead silence that seemed to absorb any sound he tried to make. He pressed buttons randomly, then with deliberate intent, but the instrument remained inert. He tried his mobile phone next. The signal bars, usually flickering at 1 or 2 despite the remote location, were now entirely absent. He walked to the window, holding the phone aloft, then to another and another, until he had circled the entire ground floor. The result was consistent. No service. This was more than a remote location. It felt like an active suppression. He remembered the drive-in, the long, winding road that seemed to stretch further with each passing mile. He had planned to make a supply run, perhaps even visit the public library in the nearest town, or follow up on a potential lead regarding some historical documents at a regional research station. The thought of the research station now felt distant, a fading obligation from another life. It wasn't fear of the unknown outside, but an odd, compelling pull from within the house itself. It wasn't a sound one heard with the ears, but felt in the chest, a deep, pervasive thrum that settled into his bones. It was a peculiar sensation, like being cradled by something vast and ancient, a strange comfort in its immense, heavy presence. Days blurred into an indistinguishable sequence. Marcus found himself neglecting meals, his stomach a knot of dull hunger he frequently ignored. He would wake, not from sleep, but from a profound lethargy, and wander the manor. His research, once meticulous and driven, became aimless. He'd sit for hours in the library, not reading, but simply staring at the spines of the books, his mind drifting into a haze of half-formed thoughts and fragmented memories. He'd catch his reflection in a tarnished, mirror-sunken eyes, a pale, unshaven face, clothes rumpled and stained, and feel no particular alarm, only a vague disinterest. He began to feel an almost proprietorial warmth towards its peeling wallpaper and dust-laden furniture. It was his house now, and it demanded his attention, his presence. The outside world, with its frantic demands and trivial concerns, seemed utterly irrelevant. He stopped before a heavy oak door, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and intertwine. He hadn't noticed them before, or perhaps he simply hadn't seen them. Now they pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. He pushed the door open. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through a high, grimy window. The basin was empty, but its interior was scored with deep, deliberate gouges, as if something had been dragged across its surface repeatedly, or perhaps contained within. His gaze fell upon a small, nearly invisible inscription carved into the basin's rim. He leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. The characters were archaic, almost pictographic, But one symbol stood out, repeated several times. An open hand, palm up, with a single radiating line extending from its center. Below it, in what appeared to be a later, more crude etching, was a single word, scratched deep into the stone. Feed. A tremor passed through Marcus, not of fear, but of profound recognition. The house wasn't just old, not just haunted. It was a maw, and he, like those before him, was merely sustenance. The strange comfort, the lethargy, the forgotten world outside, it was all part of the process, a gentle lulling before the true consumption. A strange, quiet understanding settled over him. He was not trapped in the house. He was becoming of it. A faint, insidious hum resonated through Marcus's bones, a vibration that felt less like sound and more like an internal tremor. The realization from the previous day that the manor was a living maw had settled into a chilling certainty. A fleeting thought flickered. Had he misremembered? The notion was unsettling, a tiny crack in the edifice of his ordered mind. He moved through the house with a purpose that felt increasingly borrowed. He needed to verify the records, to prove the house's physical impossibility. His notes, kept in a sturdy leather journal, were his anchor. But the journal itself felt alien in his grip, the familiar texture of the worn cover momentarily strange. He opened it, scanning his own precise script. West wing, second floor, corridor length, 30 feet, 3 doors, leading to study, guest bath, linen closet. He closed his eyes, picturing the layout. It was clear, it was precise. Yet when he opened them, the corridor before him stretched beyond 30 feet, a 4th door now visible at its distant end, its wood a darker, unvarnished shade. He knew this house. He had studied its blueprints, walked its every room. But the house seemed to shift, not violently, but with a subtle, almost apologetic grace, like a polite host rearranging furniture when his back was turned. He ran a hand along the wall, feeling the cool, rough plaster, then a section of smooth, painted wood that hadn't been there before. The air, typically still, stirred with a faint, dry scent of old paper and something else, a metallic tang, like distant rust. He found himself in the library, though he hadn't consciously directed his steps there. The towering shelves, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to press in, their dusty volumes watching. His gaze fell instead on a small, leather-bound diary tucked between 2 larger works. He had never seen it before. He pulled it out. The cover was blank, unadorned. His fingers traced the worn leather. A strange familiarity bloomed within him, an unbidden memory of a cramped hand, of ink bleeding slightly on thin pages. This isn't mine, he thought, but it feels like it is. He opened the diary. The script was elegant, faded, describing days of meticulous study, of long nights spent poring over esoteric texts. The entries spoke of architectural anomalies, of rooms that appeared and vanished, of a profound isolation. The walls breathe, one entry read, and with each exhalation, a piece of me drifts away. Marcus felt a sudden dizzying lurch. The words felt like his own, a secret confession he had somehow forgotten. He wasn't reading it. He was recalling it. He staggered back, bumping into a heavy wooden chair. The diary slipped from his grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud. He looked at his hands, then at the diary. His own hands, calloused from years of handling old books, but in his mind's eye he saw them as slender, pale, adorned with an antique signet ring. I am a historian. This is my house. But the conviction wavered, a flimsy sail in a gathering storm. Driven by a desperate need to ground himself, he resolved to revisit the research station. He remembered its location precisely, a converted attic space, accessible only through a hidden door behind a tapestry in the master bedroom. He strode towards the main staircase, his heart thumping an erratic rhythm against his ribs. He ascended, the familiar creak of the treads a small comfort. But at the top, instead of the wide landing leading to the master suite, he faced a narrow, unfamiliar corridor lined with institutional-looking metal lockers. He pushed open one of the locker doors. Inside, meticulously arranged, were strange instruments. Glass vials filled with murky liquids, intricate brass devices with multiple dials, and a collection of yellowed, handwritten charts filled with incomprehensible symbols. This was not the research station he remembered. This was something else entirely, a brutal, functional space that had no place in the sprawling, ornate manor. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to force his racing thoughts into order. He was trapped on this unfamiliar floor, in this sterile, unsettling section of the house. Perhaps I built this. He saw himself, a different self, hunched over a workbench, the faint glow of gaslight illuminating a face drawn with obsessive focus. He felt the phantom weight of a heavy leather apron on his chest. He stumbled, his knees weak, his vision blurring at the edges. The house was not merely shifting its walls. It was shifting his very foundation. He was no longer certain of his name, his past, or even his present. He was a vessel, his own memories and perceptions overwritten by the countless others the house had consumed. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, mingling with the dry scent of ozone. He was losing himself, and the labyrinthine manor, now a physical manifestation of his fractured mind, offered no escape. He was merely another ghost, waiting to fully materialize. And with each passing day, Marcus read aloud, his voice a low murmur in the cavernous research station. It demands more. The whispers are louder now, not just in the walls, but in my own thoughts, blurring the lines of what I once knew to be true. He traced the faded ink with a fingertip. The diarist's script, once so precise, had begun to fray, the letters wavering like reflections in disturbed water. The entries that followed spoke of a pervasive cold that settled deep into the bone, regardless of the roaring fires. They described a creeping apathy, a loss of interest in the very research that had drawn the individual to the manor. He pulled his wool shawl tighter. The diarist detailed increasingly vivid and disturbing dreams, not his own, but fragmented memories of others, faces he didn't recognize, rooms that shifted in impossible ways, a constant gnawing hunger that was never his, yet felt intensely personal. Marcus paused, a sudden sharp pang of recognition striking him. The dreams he'd been having, disjointed, vivid, often filled with an inexplicable sense of loss, had been growing more frequent, more insistent. Names, dates, entire passages of text. They vanish from my mind even as I read them. It is as if a fog has descended, thick and cloying, muffling thought. He had, just yesterday, spent an hour searching for a specific volume on local folklore, convinced he had placed it on the oak table, only to find it already open on his reading stand, a bookmark halfway through. He'd dismissed it as distraction, a lapse in concentration. But the frequency of these minor incidents had been increasing, small gaps in his memory, odd moments of disorientation. He turned the page. The entries became shorter, more desperate. The house. It breathes. I feel it, a slow, rhythmic pulse beneath the floorboards, in the very stone. It is not an echo, not a draft. It is life. He pressed a hand to his sternum, feeling his own heart thrumming. He leaned closer to the diary, the faint scent of aged paper and something else, something metallic, like old blood or rust, filling his nostrils. It feeds, the next entry declared, the single word dominating the page, stark and terrifying. Not on sustenance as we understand it, not on flesh, but on thought, on experience, on the very essence of being. It siphons away the past, the memories that define us. It devours sanity, leaving only echoes and confusion. His head felt light, his thoughts sluggish. He remembered the groundskeeper, his vacant eyes, the way he would sometimes trail off mid-sentence, a flicker of fear in his gaze before it was replaced by dull acceptance. He remembered the housekeeper, her increasingly erratic behavior, her sudden bursts of inexplicable anger followed by profound melancholy. They had both seemed diminished. The air, usually still, felt heavy, thick, as if it contained a presence, vast and ancient, watching him. Listening. It remembers. It becomes. The diary slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the flagstones. The manor was not merely old, not merely haunted. It was an organism, a predatory entity, ancient and insatiable, drawing sustenance from the very fabric of human consciousness. It was a living, malevolent maw, and Blackwood Manor was its teeth. He felt the dull ache behind his eyes, the pervasive exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to alleviate. He felt the insidious creeping of forgetfulness, the subtle shifts in his perception of time. They were the preliminary stages of consumption. He was not merely an inhabitant. He was sustenance. He was not a researcher. He was an offering. The house wasn't just inhabited by something. The house was the something. And he, Marcus, the skeptical historian, the reclusive scholar, was its current, preferred meal. The thought settled in his gut like a stone, heavy and suffocating. He was not investigating a mystery. He was living a slow, deliberate sacrifice. And the house was hungry. The cold dread that had settled in Marcus's bones sharpened into a brittle, furious clarity. The diary's words, still echoing in the hollow chambers of his mind, had stripped away the last vestiges of his academic skepticism. This was not a haunting, not a metaphor for generational trauma, but a predatory intelligence. The manor was not merely old. It was alive. And it was feeding. A tremor ran through him, not of fear, but of a desperate primal defiance. He would not be another swallowed memory, another echo in its stone maw. He pushed himself up from the flagstones, the diary still lying forgotten beside his foot. He felt its attention, a subtle shift in the manor's deep, ancient pulse. It knew his newfound resolve. It would resist. He had to find a way out, or a way to fight back. His mind, sharper than it had been in days, sifted through every scrap of history, every legend, every unsettling detail he had cataloged. Scientific, yet entirely alien to modern understanding. A specific phrase surfaced from the depths of his memory, a line from a fragmented letter by a long-dead scholar. The counter-frequency sought within the subterranean station. Subterranean station. The words resonated with an unnerving precision. He recalled a peculiar anomaly in the manor's original blueprints, a section beneath the oldest wing, marked with an indecipherable symbol. He had dismissed it as a drafting error, an architectural quirk. The manor responded. He pressed a hand to his temple, fighting the sudden, insistent urge to simply sit down, to let the pervasive lethargy consume him. He headed for the oldest part of the manor, the crumbling foundations near the forgotten crypt. He found the section of the blueprint he remembered, a small, square room indicated beneath the old servants' quarters, but without any obvious entry point. He ran his hands along the rough-hewn stone, feeling for a seam, a hidden latch. Despair threatened to resurface, but he forced it down, fueled by the terrifying knowledge of what awaited him if he failed. Smoother, as if it had been worn by countless touches, despite its hidden location. He pressed. Nothing. He pushed. Still nothing. Frustration clawed at him. He leaned against the wall, head bowed, trying to clear the mental static. The manor pulsed, a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to originate from the very stone beneath his feet. And then he felt it, not with his hands, but with his ear pressed against the wall. A faint, rhythmic click whir, almost imperceptible, emanating from within the wall. A mechanism. He scanned the stone again, this time not for a seam, but for an imperfection. Near the floor, half obscured by decades of grime, was a tiny, almost invisible pinhole. He dug at it with a fingernail, then with the sharp edge of an old coin he found in his pocket. It yielded, revealing a small, rusty lever. He pulled it. A blast of stale, frigid air, thick with the scent of ozone and dust, washed over him. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then retrieved an oil lamp, its flame flickering precariously in the sudden draft, and stepped into the unknown. The passage descended steeply, the rough-hewn stone walls giving way to something smoother, more uniform, yet still ancient. The rhythmic click-whir intensified, growing into a low mechanical hum. The passage ended abruptly in a heavy bolted metal door. It was pitted with rust, but its construction was clearly industrial, out of place in the manor's otherwise Gothic architecture. He unlatched the bolts, each one screeching in protest, and pushed the door open. The sound of the click-whir became a steady, low thrum, emanating from the depths of the room beyond. He stepped into a space unlike anything he had seen in the manor. It was a subterranean research station. The room was circular, carved out of the living rock, its walls lined with shelves holding strange glass apparatuses, copper coils, and intricate rusted machinery that seemed to serve no discernible purpose. A central pedestal held a complex array of dials, levers, and a large faceted crystal that pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, casting a pale, sickly green light across the metallic surfaces. Dust lay thick on everything, but the air, despite its age, felt charged, expectant. This was not a place of study in the conventional sense. It was a laboratory for something else entirely. On a workbench, beneath a layer of fine gray powder, he found a series of leather-bound journals. Their covers were brittle, their pages yellowed. He opened the first one. The script was an archaic form of English, densely packed, filled with diagrams and symbols that made his head ache with their complexity. He skimmed, his eyes darting across the pages, searching for a sign, a clue. The resonance frequency, the oscillation dampener, a means to disrupt the entity's feeding cycle, requires a focal point, an anchor, the etheric resonator. His gaze snapped to the central pedestal, the faceted crystal pulsing with its internal light. That was it, the etheric resonator. He read further, piecing together the fragmented instructions, the desperate notes of the long-dead researchers. It wasn't about destroying the manor, not entirely. It was about severing its connection, starving it, forcing it into dormancy. The process was intricate, dangerous. It required precise calibration, a specific sequence of actions, and a profound understanding of the manor's own energetic signature. And, most terrifyingly, it required a sacrifice. Not of life, but of something else. A part of the operator. A binding. Marcus felt the manor's presence in this hidden space, stronger now, enraged. The hum of the machinery seemed to falter, the green light of the crystal to dim. You are mine. He gripped the journal, his knuckles white. His mind reeled from the implications, the sheer audacity of the plan. But as he looked at the pulsing crystal, at the faded diagrams in the journal, a grim, determined resolve hardened in his eyes. This was his chance. A slim, terrifying chance. And he would take it. A grim determination had settled over Marcus, a cold, hard knot in his gut. The journal lay open, its faded ink outlining a desperate, impossible gamble. The pulsing crystal, nestled in a tarnished silver setting he'd found tucked inside a hidden compartment, thrummed with a low, almost inaudible hum against the aged wood of the desk. Its glow cast shifting shadows across the diagrams, revealing intricate patterns of energy flow, of suppression and redirection. He understood now. This was not merely a house. It was a complex, self-sustaining system, and the crystal was its malignant heart. His plan, born from weeks of obsessive study, was audacious, almost suicidal: to sever that heart, or at least disrupt its rhythm enough to break its hold. He moved through the manor's labyrinthine passages, the weight of the journal and the cold metal of a specialized toolkit heavy in his hands. He felt the house's awareness, a prickling sensation on his skin, a pressure building behind his eyes. A door he had just passed, heavy oak with iron studs, slammed shut behind him with a resonant boom that echoed through the empty halls. The sound was too violent, too sudden to be merely a draft. He tried the handle. It was locked, though he knew he hadn't engaged the bolt. He continued, his pace quickening. His destination was the concealed research station he'd painstakingly uncovered in the manor's deepest foundations. It was a place designed for observation, for understanding the very mechanisms he now sought to dismantle. He had spent countless hours there, poring over forgotten records, deciphering cryptic notes left by a previous occupant who had almost succeeded, almost understood. As he descended the narrow, winding staircase leading to the station, the stone steps themselves seemed to shift beneath his feet. A grating sound, like massive gears grinding, vibrated through the floor. Dust rained down from the ceiling, thick and choking. For a moment, he thought the passage would collapse, burying him alive. He stumbled into the research station, a circular chamber carved from solid rock, its walls lined with shelves holding empty specimen jars and tarnished instruments. His makeshift workstation, a rickety table piled with his notes and the portable scanner he'd brought, stood in the center. The pulsing crystal, now removed from its setting and placed on a lead-lined plate, pulsed with an angry, accelerated rhythm. The diagrams on the journal page seemed to writhe in its light. It was a blur of motion, a fleeting impression of long, skeletal fingers. He flinched back, stumbling over a loose floorboard. He knew it wasn't physical, not in the conventional sense, but the fear was visceral, immediate. "You won't stop me," Marcus muttered, his voice raw, hoarse. He was talking to the house, to the entity that permeated every stone, every beam. The lights in the research station, powered by a temporary generator he'd installed, flickered wildly. He saw them then, indistinct forms coalescing in the corners of the room. Figures shrouded in mist, their faces obscured, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were the echoes, the consumed, the manor's trapped victims, now roused to defend their captor. One figure, taller than the others, stepped forward. It raised an arm, and the air around Marcus grew impossibly heavy, crushing. Memories, vivid and disjointed, flashed through his mind. His mother's laugh, a forgotten childhood toy, the scent of his old university library. They were not his memories, not entirely. They were fragments, twisted and distorted, infused with a profound sense of loss and despair, sensations that were not his own but threatened to overwhelm him. The house was trying to break him, to flood his consciousness with the agony of those it had devoured. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head, trying to dislodge the invading thoughts. This was the absorption, the blurring of lines. It was a targeted assault on his sanity, designed to shatter his will before he could complete his task. When he opened his eyes, the figures were closer. They didn't move in any conventional way, but seemed to shimmer, to manifest directly in his personal space. Their silent, accusing presence was a torment. He forced himself to focus on the crystal, on the journal. The faded diagrams showed a precise sequence, a delicate manipulation of its core frequencies. He reached for a small, intricate device, a frequency modulator he had cobbled together from scavenged parts. He gasped, his knees buckling, the air knocked from his lungs. The room spun. He tasted bile at the back of his throat. This was the manor fighting back, not with crude violence, but with the insidious power it had honed over centuries. It was a battle for his mind, his very essence. He gripped the modulator, his hand trembling, and stared at the pulsing crystal, its light mocking his dwindling resolve. A cold, hard knot tightened in Marcus's gut. The faded ink of the journal had offered a desperate, impossible gamble, and he clutched the pulsing crystal, nestled in its tarnished silver setting like a lifeline. Its low, almost inaudible hum vibrated against his palm, a living thing in his hand, a counterpoint to the oppressive silence of the manor. He had made his choice. The air grew heavy as he descended, each step echoing in the cavernous stairwell. The grand, winding staircase, once a symbol of opulence, now felt like the throat of some vast, sleeping beast. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through a high, grimy window, swirling like lost spirits. He pushed through a heavy oak door, finding himself in a long, narrow corridor he'd never consciously registered before. The manor, he realized, was not merely old, it was folded. Spaces shifted, rooms appeared where none should be, and the geometry of the structure defied architectural logic. He could hear a faint, rhythmic thrum now, distinct from the crystal in his hand, a deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock beneath the house. The house pressed in. He tightened his grip on the crystal, forcing his gaze forward. He knew these were illusions, projected memories, attempts to derail him. His own reflection shimmered in a puddle on the stone floor, momentarily replaced by a gaunt, terrified face he vaguely recognized as one of the manor's former inhabitants from the journal entries. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only his own determined, though weary eyes staring back. The corridor ended abruptly at a heavy, reinforced steel door, utterly out of place in the ancient structure. No hinges were visible, no handle, only a small, recessed panel that glowed with a faint amber light. This was it. He pressed his palm against the panel. He flicked on his lantern. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a short, steep descent into a cavernous chamber. This was not a cellar, nor a crypt. This was the research station. The term felt utterly alien within the manor's Gothic embrace, yet here it was. Gleaming conduits snaked across the ceiling and down the walls, converging on a central structure that dominated the room. A complex web of wires and small, glowing indicators pulsed with a sickly green light. It looked like something designed to extract, to process, to feed. This was the terrifying core of the house's power, not a spectral presence, but a tangible, monstrous mechanism. The air here was thin, crackling with an unseen energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The house's malevolence was no longer implied. It was a physical pressure, a suffocating blanket pressing down on his chest. It felt aware of him, enraged by his intrusion. He consulted the journal, its pages fluttering in the unseen drafts. The instructions were precise, almost ritualistic. The logic was obscure, rooted in forgotten lore and a desperate gamble. But the previous owner had believed it could sever the house's connection to its feeders, its source of unnatural sustenance. As he approached the central cylinder, the psychological onslaught intensified. The air shimmered. His own memories, vivid and distorted, flickered before his eyes. He saw his parents, their faces blurred, their voices echoing with accusations he couldn't quite grasp. He saw his academic failures, his reclusive nature, magnified into grotesque caricatures of regret and isolation. The house was trying to break him, to make him surrender, to become another forgotten consciousness absorbed into its fabric. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over him, a bone-deep weariness that threatened to buckle his knees. Let go. Become part of something larger. You will never be alone again. He stumbled, catching himself on a cold metal console. He gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus on the task. He reached the central apparatus. With a surge of adrenaline, he slotted it into the recess. A blinding flash of emerald light erupted, followed by a deafening, resonant crack that vibrated through the very ground. The entire research station shuddered. The green lights on the conduits flared, then flickered erratically. A high-pitched whine rose from the apparatus, escalating rapidly like a dying scream. The pressure in the room became unbearable, a physical force threatening to crush him. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and the world tilted precariously. He had initiated the final desperate confrontation. The house was fighting back. Marcus clung to the cold metal console, the shock of it a meager anchor against the rising tide of disembodied thoughts. This place, this subterranean research station he had stumbled into, felt both ancient and anachronistic. Rust-pitted steel panels lined the walls, contrasting sharply with the rough-hewn stone of the manor's foundations. Overhead, a single bare bulb flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across inert machinery and banks of defunct monitors. The house pressed in, a silent, ravenous maw. He felt memories that were not his own trying to graft themselves onto his consciousness. The terror of a child lost in a labyrinthine cellar, the melancholic longing of a young woman staring out a rain-streaked window, the cold fury of a man betrayed. Each fragment tried to find purchase, to claim a piece of his identity. He gritted his teeth, his jaw aching. No. He would not become another nameless echo. He focused on the crystal. It was more than just a mineral. It was a conduit, a resonator for his own will. This crystal, found clutched in the skeletal hand of a long-dead inhabitant, vibrated with a unique energy, a counter-frequency to the house's hungry thrum. He had come here, to this hidden research station, because he'd found journals, fragmented and coded, detailing attempts by a previous occupant, a reclusive scholar, to understand the manor's true nature. The scholar had called this place the Nexus Point, a localized area where the house's consciousness was most concentrated, most vulnerable, or perhaps most powerful. His gaze swept over the console before him. Dust-laden screens displayed indecipherable data. Ancient circuit boards hummed with a low, almost imperceptible thrum, powered by what unknown source he couldn't fathom. A schematic, half erased, showed a complex network of conduits radiating outwards, deeper into the earth, deeper into the house's foundations. It wasn't just a house. It was a vast organic machine, feeding, processing, remembering. And this research station was its brain, or perhaps its digestive tract. A wave of profound despair washed over him, not his own, but projected by the house. It tried to convince him of the futility of his struggle, the inevitability of absorption. The crystal flared, hot against his palm, pushing back against the encroaching despair. He slammed his free hand onto a dusty, corroded panel on the console. A jolt of static electricity coursed through him. A monitor flickered to life, its green text scrolling rapidly, indecipherable, yet conveying a sense of immense, terrible data flow. The house recoiled slightly, a momentary lull in the mental assault. It was a reaction, a defense. He had touched a nerve. The scholar's notes had hinted at a method, not of destruction, of disruption. To overload the circuit, one entry read, to force it to digest what it cannot process. The house consumed memories, yes. What if it was fed a memory too potent, too concentrated, too alien to its own nature? A memory of pure, unadulterated will. He was a historian, a man of facts, of logic, of the past. But he was also a man who had fought, who had resisted, who had endured. He poured his own consciousness into the crystal. Every memory of defiance, every moment of clarity, every shred of his skepticism that had once protected him, now weaponized. He remembered the feeling of the sun on his face, the taste of good coffee, the smell of old books. Not as comforting anchors, but as sharp, distinct markers of his reality, distinct from the house's amorphous past. The air crackled with unseen energy. The monitors around him flared, then sparked, some exploding with showers of green and blue light. It was pain, pure and agonizing, But it was its pain, not his. He felt himself being pulled, stretched, his consciousness expanding, blurring at the edges. The crystal became an extension of his arm, his will, his very being. He pushed, channeling his entire existence, his unique perspective, into the house's nexus point. The research station shuddered. Dust rained down in thick clouds. He felt the house fighting back, trying to absorb the invasive surge, to integrate it, to nullify it. But this was different. This was not a passive memory to be consumed. This was an active, conscious counterforce. Then a profound shift. The pulling sensation intensified, but it was no longer just absorption. It was integration, yes, but on his terms, or at least a terrible compromise. He felt a part of himself, not just his memories, but his very essence flowing outwards, infusing the house. But at the same time, he felt the house's vast ancient consciousness, its accumulated sorrow and hunger, rushing into him. He was no longer distinct. The lines blurred, not just between past and present, but between Marcus and the manor. The crystal pulsed one last blinding time, then shattered in his hand, sending fragments of light and pain through his palm. The air was thick with ozone and the scent of burnt circuits. He felt different, not consumed, not entirely. He could still feel his own thoughts, a distinct core of Marcus. But he also felt the cold stone walls, the deep earth beneath the foundations, the ancient, silent hum of the house itself. He felt the countless memories, not as a cacophony, but as a vast, organized library, accessible, yet overwhelming. He reached out a hand, not to a console, but to the very fabric of the house. He felt its wounded places, the areas where his concentrated will had struck. It was weakened, yes, but not destroyed. And he was changed. He was still Marcus, the historian, the skeptic. But now, he was also something else. A guardian, a prisoner, an integral, altered part of the entity he had sought to understand. The house had absorbed him, but he had, perhaps, poisoned its heart with his own defiant will. He was a resonance, a discordant note in its ancient song, forever entwined, forever fighting from within. The question of absorption or escape had been answered, terrifyingly, with neither.